Flight attendant refused to let Undercover CO board first class, but instantly regrets it. Michael Carter adjusted the hood of his gray sweatshirt as he stepped into the crowded airport terminal. The air was filled with the familiar hum of announcements, the roll of luggage wheels on tiles, and the occasional laughter of travelers embarking on adventures. He had walked through airports countless times before, but this time was different. No one knew him. No staff member greeted him with a rehearsed smile. No VIP lounge attendant hurried to fetch him a drink. Today, he wasn't the CEO of Skylux Airlines, he was just another passenger. Dressed in a plain hoodie, jeans, and scuffed sneakers, Michael blended seamlessly into the sea of economy passengers. He liked it that way. This wasn't just a personal choice, it was a mission. Over the past few months, his inbox had been flooded with complaints from passengers alleging classism and unprofessional behavior among his airline staff, especially in first class. While his executive team assured him they were handling it, Michael wanted to see it for himself. Time to get a real perspective, he muttered under his breath, weaving through the terminal's chaotic energy. His heart beat a little faster than usual, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of stepping into an environment where no one would filter their behavior because he was in charge. As Michael approached Gate C-15, he took stock of his surroundings. Families huddled together near the charging stations, road warriors typed furiously on laptops, and flight attendants in crisp uniforms chatted near the counter. He spotted a young mother wrestling with a stroller, her toddler reaching for a toy that had rolled under a nearby seat. Michael smiled to himself, mentally noting how staff interactions with passengers like her could say a lot about the airline's customer service philosophy. The first-class boarding lane was forming. A group of sharply dressed business people chatted in low tones, their expensive luggage placed neatly beside them. A man in a tailored suit tapped impatiently on his smartwatch, glancing at the gate agent as if to hurry the process along. Michael quietly joined the line, clutching his first-class boarding pass. He had chosen this flight specifically, a mid-morning route that was rarely overbooked and often staffed with senior crew members. He hoped to see how they handled the delicate balance of catering to first-class passengers while respecting everyone else. The line inched forward. As Michael approached the gate, he noticed a tall woman with a confident stance managing the first-class boarding process. Her uniform was immaculate, and her name tag read Vanessa. She exuded authority, her sharp eyes scanning each boarding pass with a level of scrutiny that felt almost unnecessary. Michael's turn came, and he offered her his boarding pass with a polite smile. Vanessa took one look at him and raised an eyebrow. Her gaze flicked from his casual attire to the boarding pass, and her expression hardened. "This line is for first-class passengers," she said, her voice firm and loud enough for others in the line to hear. Michael tilted his head slightly, surprised. "I know," he replied evenly. "Here's my ticket." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line as she took the boarding pass and inspected it as if it were counterfeit. She scanned it twice, then handed it back with a patronizing smile. "I think there's been a mistake. Upgrades like these are usually for promotions or charity events. Economy boarding is over there." She pointed toward the other line, where the crowd was larger, noisier, and far less organized. Michael paused, taken aback by her assumption. He had expected to blend in and observe, but this was something else. "There's no mistake," he said calmly. "This is my seat." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her tone grew icier. "I'm sure you believe that, sir. But this line is for paying first-class passengers." The murmurs started behind him. A well-dressed woman with a sleek navy suitcase leaned forward. "He's got a valid ticket," she said curtly, her tone carrying a hint of irritation on his behalf. "You should let him through." Vanessa turned to the woman, her eyes narrowing. "I'll handle this, ma'am," she said before refocusing on Michael. "I'm going to need you to step aside while I confirm this with a supervisor." Michael didn't argue. He stepped aside, allowing the other passengers to board. The murmurs continued, some sympathetic, others tinged with amusement. He caught a few snippets. "He doesn't look like first class," one man muttered to his wife. "Maybe it really was a mistake." another said. Michael stood quietly, his expression neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. How often does this happen? How many people are treated this way because they don't look the part? A few minutes later, the supervisor arrived. He was a middle-aged man with a warm, professional demeanor. He glanced at Michael's ticket and nodded almost immediately. "This is valid," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, you're good to go. My apologies for the delay." Vanessa's expression faltered for a split second before she recovered, plastering on a strained smile. "Of course," she said quickly, stepping aside. "Enjoy your flight." Michael nodded politely to the supervisor and walked down the jet bridge, his thoughts swirling. He wasn't angry, not yet. But he couldn't shake the sting of the encounter. It wasn't about his ego. It was about what this revealed about the culture within his airline. If this is how a first-class passenger is treated based on assumptions, how are they treating others? As he settled into his window seat, he took a deep breath, letting the hum of the cabin calm his thoughts. The first-class cabin was spacious and quiet, with plush seats arranged in a 2-to-2 configuration. A glass of champagne was placed on the armrest of the seat beside him, where a man in a tailored suit adjusted his tie. The man glanced at Michael, his eyes briefly scanning his casual attire, before returning to his in-flight magazine. "Rough morning?" the man asked, his tone polite but distant. Michael smiled faintly. "You could say that." As the cabin filled, Michael observed Vanessa making her way down the aisle, greeting each passenger with a warm smile and offering personalized service. When she reached Michael's row, her demeanor shifted. She placed a prepackaged hot towel on his armrest without making eye contact, then moved on to the next passenger with an exaggerated cheerfulness. Michael said nothing. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and began jotting down observations. First interaction, gate confrontation. Second interaction, service disparity. Tone shift noticeable with other passengers. He glanced at the flight attendants working alongside Vanessa. One of them, a younger woman with a kind smile, seemed genuinely attentive, offering passengers drinks and blankets without hesitation. The contrast was striking, and Michael made another note: training issue or cultural? Further investigation needed. The flight was barely underway, but Michael already knew this experience would change something, not just for Vanessa, but for the airline as a whole. He leaned back in his seat, staring out the window as the plane taxied to the runway. For now, he would observe. But soon, Vanessa, and the company, would understand the importance of treating every passenger with dignity, no matter how they looked. As the plane roared to life and ascended into the skies, Michael Carter's mind lingered on the morning's incident at the gate. What gnawed at him most wasn't Vanessa's dismissive behavior. How many others had been judged unfairly? He wondered, staring out of the window as the cityscape shrank below. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Vanessa reappeared in the first-class cabin with a tray of champagne flutes. Her demeanor had shifted to one of forced cheerfulness, a stark contrast to the condescension she had displayed at the gate. She offered a glass to the passenger in the aisle seat beside Michael, her smile wide and polished. "Champagne for you, sir?" she asked with practiced ease. "Absolutely," the man replied, barely looking up from his tablet. Vanessa turned to Michael. For a split second, her polished mask slipped, and her eyes betrayed her discomfort. "Anything for you?" she asked curtly, her voice noticeably less warm. "No, thank you," Michael replied evenly, keeping his tone neutral. Vanessa nodded briskly and moved on, her demeanor brightening again as she attended to the other passengers. Michael couldn't help but notice the disparity. Vanessa treated those who fit her mental image of a first-class passenger, well-dressed, confident, and affluent, with deference. Yet her attitude toward him, even after his boarding pass had been confirmed, remained dismissive. He jotted a note in his pocket-sized journal, the same one he had used during countless company reviews: bias evident in service. Behavior changes depending on perceived status. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Michael leaned back in his plush seat, taking in the atmosphere of the cabin. First class was as luxurious as he had envisioned when designing it. Spacious seats with ample legroom, elegant meals served on fine china, and attentive service for every need. Or at least, that was the idea. To the untrained eye, everything seemed perfect. But Michael's trained eye picked up on the cracks beneath the surface. The younger flight attendant, Sarah, bustled through the cabin with genuine warmth, refilling drinks and offering passengers blankets. Meanwhile, Vanessa flitted from seat to seat, her demeanor varying wildly depending on who she was speaking to. Michael noticed how she lingered at the seat of a man in a designer suit, laughing softly at his jokes, her tone dripping with charm. When a woman in the last row of first class, a solo traveler in casual clothing, asked for a second glass of water, Vanessa sighed audibly before complying. Michael's internal radar buzzed. The problem isn't just Vanessa, he thought. It's cultural. Somewhere along the way, our values were lost. Halfway through the flight, an opportunity presented itself. Vanessa and Sarah paused in the galley near the first-class cabin, chatting quietly as they sorted meals onto trays. Michael removed his earbuds, pretending to stretch, and tuned his ears to their conversation. "Did you see the guy in 2B?" Vanessa said, her voice carrying a faint edge of disdain. "Which one?" Sarah replied. "The one in the hoodie," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. "Can you believe he's in first class? He doesn't belong here. I swear, they're giving upgrades to just anyone these days." Sarah hesitated. "Well, maybe he paid for the seat. You never know." "Doubt it," Vanessa said with a dry laugh. "I mean, look at him. He doesn't even know what to do with the hot towel. It's embarrassing." Michael's jaw tightened. He had been silent during the gate incident, willing to let it slide for the sake of observation, but this was different. Vanessa's words weren't just dismissive, they were indicative of a deeper issue. Still, he forced himself to remain composed. Confronting her now would be premature. Instead, he made another note: staff culture needs evaluation. Train for empathy, not assumptions. The first-class meal service began, and Sarah arrived at Michael's seat with his tray. Her demeanor was a refreshing contrast to Vanessa's. "Here you go, sir," Sarah said with a smile. "Would you like a refill on your drink?" "Yes, please," Michael said, meeting her gaze. "Thank you." As Sarah poured his drink, she hesitated for a moment, then leaned slightly closer. "I hope everything's been okay," she said in a low voice, as if she didn't want Vanessa to hear. Michael studied her expression. There was genuine concern in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that she noticed the disparity in service. He nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "It's been enlightening," he said cryptically. Sarah blinked, as though she wasn't sure how to interpret his words, but she didn't press further. "Let me know if you need anything," she said before moving on. The flight continued uneventfully for most of the passengers, but Michael's mind was working overtime. As the cabin lights dimmed for the evening, he reclined his seat and reflected on the events so far. Vanessa's behavior wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a larger problem. Somewhere in the culture of his airline, respect had been replaced by judgment, and the ethos of serving every passenger with dignity had been lost. He thought back to his early days as CEO, when he had personally reviewed the airline's core values with his leadership team. They had promised to deliver not just a flight, but an experience, one where every passenger felt valued, no matter where they sat. The gap between that vision and today's reality felt vast. Later in the flight, Michael took a quiet stroll to the back of the plane, stretching his legs and taking the opportunity to observe the economy cabin. The atmosphere was starkly different from first class, crowded, noisy, and a bit chaotic, but the crew station there seemed more grounded. A flight attendant in economy smiled as she helped an elderly passenger retrieve something from the overhead bin. Another crouched to speak to a child who was crying, her tone soothing and patient. The disparity struck Michael again. What happens in first class isn't isolated, he realized. It's about what's prioritized, and that starts from the top. On his way back to his seat, Michael passed Vanessa in the galley. She was sipping water, her expression bored. She glanced at him and quickly averted her eyes, pretending to check her clipboard. Michael said nothing, walking past her with the faintest nod. As the plane prepared for landing, Michael jotted down one final note. True leadership isn't about reacting, it's about transforming. He had seen enough. Vanessa's behavior would be addressed, but the real work lay ahead. This wasn't just about one flight attendant, it was about ensuring his airline became a place where every passenger was treated with respect, regardless of how they looked or where they sat. The wheels touched down smoothly on the tarmac, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, thanking passengers for choosing Skylux Airlines. Michael collected his belongings, deliberately leaving the small notebook on top of his carry-on. As the plane taxied to the gate, Vanessa walked through the cabin, offering each passenger a polite farewell. When she reached Michael, her smile was tight, her words perfunctory. "Thank you for flying with us," she said. Michael met her gaze for a moment. "The pleasure was all mine," he said evenly. Vanessa blinked, clearly unsure how to interpret his tone, but before she could respond, Michael moved on. He had no intention of confronting her now, not when the real conversation would happen soon, in a setting she wouldn't expect. As Michael stepped off the plane and into the terminal, the earlier confrontation at the gate lingered in his mind. He'd spent years building Skylux Airlines into a brand that promised luxury, comfort, and respect for every passenger. Yet, his first-hand experience revealed cracks in the foundation. Today wasn't just a bad day, it was a symptom of a deeper issue. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm under pressure, a skill honed during his years of negotiating high-stakes deals. But this was different. This wasn't about spreadsheets or market shares. This was about people, the heart of his airline. As he walked toward the baggage claim, Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his executive assistant Clara. "Clara, hope the flight went smoothly. Let me know if anything stood out. I've prepared notes for tomorrow's board meeting." Michael smirked at the irony. Smoothly? Not exactly. He decided not to reply yet. Clara didn't know about his undercover trip, and he wanted to gather his thoughts before sharing the experience. He had bigger plans in mind, plans that required precision, timing, and a little bit of restraint. The following morning, Michael arrived at Skylux Airlines corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of the city. His office overlooked the bustling skyline, but today he wasn't in the mood to admire the view. He had called for a meeting with his senior leadership team and requested the attendance of key department heads, including customer service, crew training, and marketing. As the team filtered into the conference room, there was a sense of curiosity. Michael rarely called impromptu meetings, and the air was thick with anticipation. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began, his tone measured but firm. "I've just returned from a flight, an unannounced one. As many of you know, I like to experience our service firsthand every now and then." A few heads nodded, but most faces looked puzzled. Michael continued. "What I saw was concerning. Very concerning." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I won't name names or share specifics yet, but I witnessed behavior that went against everything we stand for as a company. And it wasn't just one incident. It was systemic." The room grew tense. No one dared to interrupt. Michael walked to the whiteboard and wrote 2 words in bold letters: "Respect matters." "We pride ourselves on being a premier airline," he said, turning to face the group. "But respect doesn't stop at providing plush seats and fancy meals. It's about treating every passenger with dignity, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or where they're seated." The director of crew training, Lisa, shifted in her chair. "Michael, I'd like to understand more about what you experienced. Was it an issue of individual behavior or—" Michael nodded. "I'll get to that. But first, let's be honest with ourselves. Are we training our staff to see every passenger as equally valuable? Or are we silently endorsing a culture that rewards appearances over authenticity?" Lisa opened her mouth to respond but hesitated. Michael's gaze swept across the room, silently inviting others to speak. After a few moments of silence, he continued. Michael outlined his observations without naming Vanessa directly. He described the gate confrontation, the dismissive service in first class, and the clear disparity in treatment based on appearances. "What troubled me most," he said, "wasn't just the behavior of one individual. It was the lack of intervention. No one stepped in to correct it. The culture we've built allowed this to happen." The head of customer service, Ryan, frowned. "That's a tough pill to swallow. We've always emphasized professionalism in our training." "Professionalism isn't enough," Michael replied. "Empathy is the missing piece. Without it, professionalism becomes performative, selectively applied to those deemed worthy." Ryan nodded slowly, the weight of the feedback sinking in. Michael then addressed the marketing team. "And you're not off the hook either," he said, his tone less stern but still direct. "Our ads emphasize exclusivity, luxury, and status. Are we inadvertently creating an environment where staff feel pressured to cater to one type of passenger?" The room fell silent again. Michael wasn't just pointing out flaws, he was holding up a mirror. After a lengthy discussion, the team began brainstorming solutions. Lisa proposed a comprehensive retraining program focused on empathy and inclusivity. Ryan suggested developing a passenger-first initiative that rewarded positive interactions between crew and passengers, rather than just upselling premium services. Michael listened intently, offering guidance when necessary but allowing the team to take ownership of the solutions. By the end of the meeting, the outlines of a plan had begun to take shape. Empathy training, a mandatory program for all crew members, focusing on treating every passenger with dignity and respect. Leadership spot checks, senior executives, including Michael, would regularly fly undercover to evaluate the airline's service culture. Passenger feedback loop, a new system to encourage passengers to share experiences, ensuring transparency and accountability. As the meeting wrapped up, Michael leaned against the table, his posture relaxed but his expression resolute. "This isn't just about fixing one issue," he said. "It's about redefining who we are as a company. We can't call ourselves a world-class airline if we don't treat every passenger like they belong." After the meeting, Michael requested a private conversation with Lisa and Ryan. He handed them a detailed report about Vanessa's behavior during his flight, outlining the gate incident, her comments in the galley, and the service disparity. "I don't want her fired," Michael said firmly. "I want her retrained. But I also want her to understand the impact of her actions, not just on me, but on the company and our passengers." Lisa nodded. "I'll handle it personally. She'll get the message, and she'll have the opportunity to improve." Ryan added, "We'll make sure her experience becomes part of a broader case study for the crew." Michael leaned back in his chair, satisfied but not complacent. "Good. This isn't about punishment, it's about growth. For her, for us, and for the company." Later that evening, Michael sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights. The day had been long, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had always believed that leadership wasn't about issuing orders, it was about creating opportunities for transformation. As he glanced at the report on his desk, a thought struck him: Vanessa wasn't the only one at fault. Her actions were the product of a culture that he, as CEO, had allowed to develop. If he wanted real change, it had to start with him. Michael reached for his phone and composed a quick email to Clara. Subject: Leadership Memo, Respect Matters. Draft a company-wide message. I want every employee, from the crew to the corporate office, to know this: respect is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Starting tomorrow, we're setting a new standard. As he hit send, Michael felt a surge of determination. The flight had been a wake-up call, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to rebuild not just a brand, but a culture rooted in respect, empathy, and integrity. The corporate headquarters buzzed with the usual energy as employees shuffled papers, held hurried conversations, and prepared for another day. But for Vanessa, the flight attendant at the center of Michael Carter's concerns, this wasn't a usual day. She sat in a small conference room on the 12th floor, nervously glancing at the clock as she waited for her meeting to begin. Her palms felt clammy, and she replayed the flight in her mind, unsure of what had gone wrong. Vanessa knew she had been called in because of her interaction with a passenger on her last flight, the man in the hoodie. The man she'd dismissed. Her supervisor's vague email had confirmed as much. But what she didn't know was that the passenger she treated with such condescension was none other than Michael Carter, the CEO of Skylux Airlines. The door opened, and Lisa, the director of crew training, stepped in. Her expression was neutral, neither warm nor cold, but it carried an unmistakable air of authority. Vanessa stood quickly, smoothing her uniform. "Good morning, Vanessa," Lisa said, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming in today." Vanessa nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good morning." As Lisa settled into the chair opposite her, she placed a folder on the table. Vanessa noticed the Skylux Airlines logo embossed on the cover. Her stomach twisted into knots. "This is about your recent flight from JFK to LAX," Lisa began, flipping open the folder. "There were several observations made about your behavior, specifically during the boarding process and in flight service." Vanessa's heart pounded. I don't understand," she stammered. "I followed protocol." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Did you? Let's go over what happened." Lisa's voice was calm but firm as she described the gate incident. "You stopped a passenger in the first-class boarding line and questioned the validity of his ticket. You suggested, loudly enough for others to hear, that he might have received it through a charity upgrade. Do you recall that interaction?" Vanessa nodded hesitantly. "I remember. He wasn't dressed like a typical first-class passenger. I thought there had been a mistake." Lisa leaned forward slightly. "And instead of discreetly verifying his ticket, you dismissed him publicly. Does that align with our values as an airline?" Vanessa opened her mouth to respond but hesitated. The truth was, she knew it didn't. She had let her assumptions dictate her actions, and now she was paying the price. "I didn't mean to offend him," she said finally. "I was just trying to ensure the boarding process went smoothly." Lisa tapped the folder with her fingers. "Vanessa, part of ensuring a smooth process is treating every passenger with respect. We pride ourselves on offering world-class service to all our customers, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. Can you see how your behavior might have fallen short of that standard?" Vanessa nodded, her cheeks burning with shame. "Yes, I see that now." Lisa closed the folder and folded her hands on the table. "What you may not know is that the passenger in question was Michael Carter, our CEO." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Lisa, her mind racing. "The CEO?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Lisa confirmed. "And he was traveling undercover to observe how passengers are treated. Your interaction with him, both at the gate and during the flight, raised serious concerns." Vanessa's face turned pale. "I had no idea," she murmured. "I would never have acted that way if I'd known." Lisa sighed, her expression softening slightly. "That's precisely the problem, Vanessa. You shouldn't need to know someone's status or title to treat them with respect. Our values as a company don't depend on appearances or assumptions. They're universal." Vanessa lowered her gaze, shame washing over her. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I never meant to embarrass anyone, let alone the CEO." For a moment, the room was silent. Lisa studied Vanessa carefully, weighing her next words. "Here's the good news," Lisa said at last. "Michael isn't interested in punishing you. He believes in growth and second chances. But he does expect you to learn from this experience." Vanessa looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll be enrolled in our new empathy training program," Lisa explained. "This program is designed to help our crew members recognize and overcome biases, ensuring that every passenger receives the same high level of service." Vanessa nodded quickly. "I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." Lisa leaned back in her chair, her tone firm but encouraging. "Good. I believe you have the potential to be an excellent flight attendant, Vanessa." But you need to remember that every interaction matters. Whether it's with a CEO in a hoodie or a single parent in economy, your attitude sets the tone for their experience. Vanessa nodded again, a spark of determination flickering in her eyes. Thank you for giving me a chance to improve. As Vanessa left the conference room, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She felt embarrassed, humbled, and surprisingly hopeful. She knew she had made mistakes, big ones, but she also knew she had the opportunity to learn and grow. Later that evening, Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, flipping through the materials for the empathy training program. Each page offered insights into recognizing bias, understanding diverse perspectives, and fostering genuine connections with passengers. The more she read, the more she realized how much she had overlooked in her role. I've been so focused on appearances, she thought, that I forgot what this job is really about, making people feel welcome. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, Michael received a report from Lisa about her meeting with Vanessa. He read through it carefully, noting her willingness to take responsibility and her commitment to the training program. Good, he said aloud to himself. That's a start. He leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the broader picture. Vanessa's behavior was troubling, but it wasn't unique. It was a symptom of a culture that prioritized appearances over authenticity, and that culture needed to change. Michael opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his leadership team. The subject line was simple: a new standard for service. By the end of the day, Skylux Airlines had launched its first wave of reforms. Empathy training sessions were scheduled for all crew members, with plans to expand to other departments. A new customer feedback platform was announced, encouraging passengers to share their experiences, both good and bad. And Michael made a personal commitment to continue flying undercover, ensuring that the company stayed true to its values. As the sun set over the city, Michael looked out of his office window, feeling a sense of resolve. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. This wasn't just about fixing Vanessa's behavior. It was about rebuilding a culture of respect, one interaction at a time. The days following Michael's return from his undercover flight marked the beginning of a significant transformation at Skylux Airlines. The incident with Vanessa wasn't just a wake-up call for her, it had sparked a company-wide reckoning. The CEO had made it clear that systemic change was necessary, and he was determined to lead the charge. In his sleek, modern office, Michael sat with Lisa, Ryan, and Sarah, the department heads he trusted most. The team had gathered to finalize the rollout of new initiatives aimed at reshaping the airline's culture. Empathy training is just the beginning, Michael said, scanning a set of documents spread across the glass table. I want this to be more than a box we check. It needs to change how we think, interact, and serve. Ryan, the head of customer service, nodded. We've outlined a training program that focuses on emotional intelligence. It's interactive, with real-world scenarios. Employees will walk away understanding how assumptions can damage relationships. Michael leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. Good. But what about accountability? How do we ensure these lessons stick? Sarah, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. We're introducing a peer review system. Flight crews will evaluate each other after every trip, not just based on tasks completed but on how well they embody our values. Passengers will also be encouraged to provide detailed feedback. Michael tapped his pen on the table. I like it. Accountability is crucial. And what about recognition? Let's reward those who go above and beyond. Lisa smiled. We're launching a new initiative called Sky Bright Stars. Employees who demonstrate exceptional empathy and service will receive public recognition, bonuses, and opportunities for career advancement. Michael grinned. Perfect. Let's make this culture shift visible. For Vanessa, the changes were deeply personal. The empathy training program became her lifeline, a chance to rebuild not only her career but also her confidence. The first session was held in a bright, spacious training room at Skylux's headquarters. Vanessa arrived early, clutching her notebook, nervous but determined. The trainer, a former psychologist specializing in workplace culture, began with a powerful statement. Every passenger is a story waiting to be discovered. Your job isn't just to serve, it's to listen, connect, and make them feel seen." The room fell silent as the attendees absorbed the words. Vanessa thought back to her encounter with Michael. She had dismissed him, not because of his actions, but because of her assumptions. The realization stung, but it also fueled her resolve to do better. During the training, the group was asked to role-play challenging scenarios: a frazzled parent trying to juggle 2 toddlers, an elderly passenger struggling with mobility, and a young traveler nervous about flying. Vanessa volunteered for each role, determined to understand how it felt to be on the receiving end of indifference or kindness. By the end of the day, Vanessa felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she truly understood that her role was about more than delivering drinks or enforcing rules. It was about creating moments of comfort in an often stressful environment. 2 weeks later, Michael embarked on another undercover flight. This time, he chose a popular route known for its mix of business travelers and vacationers. He dressed casually again but swapped the hoodie for a collared shirt, curious to see if the changes were taking root. As he approached the gate, he noticed a difference immediately. The boarding process was seamless, with no judgmental glances or condescending remarks. The flight attendants greeted passengers warmly, even those in jeans and sneakers. Michael found his seat in first class and observed the crew as they prepared for takeoff. To his surprise, Vanessa was among them. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her interactions noticeably more thoughtful. When a young couple in the last row of first class asked for extra pillows, Vanessa responded promptly, offering them with a genuine smile. As the flight progressed, Michael watched her closely. She engaged with passengers of all backgrounds equally, asking about their travel plans and offering small but thoughtful gestures. A refill here, a kind word there. It was a stark contrast to the Vanessa he had encountered just weeks earlier. When she reached Michael's row, her professionalism didn't falter. "Good afternoon," she said with a polite smile. "Would you care for a drink or a snack?" Michael met her gaze and smiled. "Just water, thank you." Vanessa nodded, quickly fulfilling his request. She didn't recognize him, but Michael could see the change in her demeanor. She wasn't just following protocol, she was embodying the values he had hoped to see across the airline. Midway through the flight, Michael struck up a conversation with the passenger seated beside him, a retiree traveling to visit his grandchildren. "This is my first time flying with Skylux," the man said, sipping his coffee. "I've got to say, the service is excellent. They treat you like a person, not just a ticket." Michael smiled. "That's great to hear. What stood out to you?" The man gestured toward Vanessa, who was helping another passenger adjust their seat. "That flight attendant, she's been incredible. She noticed my arthritis and offered to stow my bag without me even asking. Small thing, but it meant the world." Michael's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about Vanessa. It was about the culture shift taking shape. Passengers were noticing, and that meant the company was on the right track. After the flight, Michael waited until most of the passengers had disembarked before approaching Vanessa. She was tidying the galley, humming softly to herself. "Excuse me," he said, his tone casual. Vanessa turned, her smile polite but slightly wary. "Yes, sir? Is there something I can assist you with?" Michael extended his hand. "I just wanted to thank you for the excellent service today. It's clear you care about your passengers." Vanessa blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Michael hesitated, then added, "Keep it up. You're making a real difference." Vanessa nodded, her expression thoughtful. As Michael walked away, he felt a sense of closure. Vanessa's journey wasn't over, but she was on the right path, and so was Skylux Airlines. Over the following months, the changes at Skylux Airlines became more evident. Passengers praised the airline on social media, sharing stories of exceptional service. Employees embraced the empathy training, and the Sky Bright Stars initiative inspired crew members to strive for excellence. At headquarters, Michael received weekly updates on the program's progress. Vanessa's name appeared several times, highlighted as a standout participant who had embraced the company's values. One afternoon, Lisa walked into Michael's office, holding a letter from a passenger. It described an interaction with Vanessa, who had gone out of her way to comfort a nervous flyer. The passenger called her the kindest, most thoughtful flight attendant I've ever met. Michael read the letter twice, a smile spreading across his face. This, he said, holding up the letter, is what success looks like. Skylux Airlines wasn't just recovering, it was thriving. And it all began with a single flight and a CEO who believed in the power of change.